In 1999, the call came just after 6:45 a.m. It was a cold Thursday in early November, and Mateo Jr. had barely taken his first sip of coffee when the phone rang. He answered with a grunt, still groggy, rubbing his eyes. On the other end, a familiar voice, Mr. Halberd, one of his loyal customers, stranded somewhere near Yosemite Park. His old Ford pickup had broken down on Route 120, just a few miles past the Arch Rock entrance. Mateo Jr., 33, was not the kind of man to leave someone hanging, even if that meant skipping breakfast and driving 3 hours out of Fresno on an empty stomach. His mother, Gloria, watched from the kitchen window as he loaded his rusted red toolbox into the back of his van. She knew that look, focused, firm, generous, the same look he had since he was a teenager fixing lawnmowers for the neighbors. "Don't forget your jacket, it's colder up there," she said. He flashed her a grin and tapped his chest twice where his San Francisco 49ers hoodie peeked through his coat. "I'm good, Ma." On his finger, the ring glinted in the soft morning light. His high school graduation ring, silver with a deep red gem, a token of pride he never took off, not even to sleep. It was the last time she saw him. That night, when the sun dipped behind the Sierra Nevada and the wind swept through the bare branches in her yard, Gloria waited. By midnight, her hands trembled around the landline. No call, no sign. The next morning, his bed was still made, his coffee cup still half full on the counter. Mateo had never been to Yosemite. He often said the wilderness wasn't his thing. He preferred the rhythm of city life, the smell of grease and engine oil, the crackling sound of a football game on the shop's old radio. Nature, to him, was a postcard, not a destination. The park rangers confirmed that Mr. Halberd's truck had indeed broken down. They also confirmed it had been towed by a private garage, but no record showed Mateo ever arriving there. His van was found 2 days later, abandoned in a gravel turnout off Big Oak Flat Road, unlocked, toolbox still in the back, keys still in the ignition. The driver's seat was empty. His jacket was on the passenger side. His ring was gone. The first search started that same afternoon. Rangers combed the area with dogs, volunteers, helicopters. Flyers with his photo were pinned to trees handed out at gas stations. Local TV ran his picture. Square jaw, slight stubble, kind eyes, and always that 49ers cap pulled low over his brow. Gloria walked every inch of that forest trail the next week, calling his name into the wind, her voice swallowed by the vastness of granite and pine. "Mateo, it's Mom. Please." Nothing answered. What haunted them was how ordinary it had been. A quick job, a favor, a man who left home with coffee breath and a promise to be back by dinner. He wasn't running from anything. There were no debts, no secrets, no strange behavior, just a mechanic doing what he always did, helping someone. 3 days later, it rained hard in Yosemite. The roads turned to mud. The flyers peeled from the trees. Gloria stayed one more night in the motel across from the visitor center, staring at the ceiling, clutching his sweatshirt to her face. On the 4th day, she returned to Fresno with an ache that never left her chest. The weeks turned into months, the months into years. Every year on November 5th, she lit a candle by the window, the flame reflecting in the glass, as if waiting for his shadow to appear. His photo remained on the fridge, his tools untouched in the garage, his 49ers cap on the hook by the door. They never had a funeral. No body, no answers, no closure, just a mother, waiting. Gloria never accepted silence as an answer. In the first months after Mateo vanished, she kept a spiral notebook on the kitchen table filled with notes, times, names of rangers, GPS coordinates, even weather reports from the day he disappeared. Everything seemed important. Everything might be a clue. She returned to Yosemite every month long after the volunteers stopped coming. She walked the same trails, asked hikers if they'd seen anything strange, left flyers under windshield wipers in the parking lots. It became a ritual, a way to keep him alive. Back home in Fresno, the small brick house stood like a shrine. Mateo Jr.'s bedroom was untouched, bed neatly made, boots tucked in the corner, a shelf lined with miniature NFL helmets, each dusted carefully. At the center stood the most important one, the red and gold helmet of the San Francisco 49ers. He used to say it brought him luck. Birthdays became something else entirely. In 2000, the cake went uneaten. In 2001, she bought a card and wrote in it as if he'd read it. In 2002, she sat alone on the couch and watched the 49ers game, whispering commentary under her breath, pretending he was sitting beside her. She even made popcorn, just how he liked it, with too much salt. Time didn't just pass. It pressed down, eroding hope, inch by inch. There were rumors. A trucker swore he saw someone matching Mateo's description at a gas station in Nevada. A nurse from Sacramento thought she'd treated him for a concussion in 2003. A tourist mentioned a man wandering aimlessly through the eastern trails of Yosemite, looking dazed. Gloria followed every thread, took every call, made every trip. Each time she returned with her notebook heavier, her heart thinner. Mateo's siblings began to move on. One by one, they stopped showing up for the vigils. They stopped asking. Some even said gently, "Maybe it's time, Ma." But Gloria wouldn't let go. For her, an absence wasn't an ending. It was space waiting to be filled. She wrote letters to local news stations. She joined missing persons forums. She visited psychics, held candles on the shoulder of the highway where his van had been found, tucked handwritten notes into tree hollows and prayed for dreams to guide her. Sometimes she thought she heard his voice on the wind. Sometimes she saw a man pass by the grocery store window and felt her knees weaken. In 2007, 8 years after he vanished, the local authorities closed the case. No new evidence, they said. It was procedure. For Gloria, it was betrayal. They gave up, she muttered, stroking the worn fabric of his 49ers cap. But I won't. Her voice, once sharp, had become soft, almost inaudible. But her eyes, still defiant. Mateo had no children, never married. His life was his garage. He worked late, watched football religiously, and came home covered in grease and smiles. But he had nieces and nephews, and over the years they started to ask questions. Aunt Gloria, did Uncle Mateo leave because he didn't love us? She would pause, gather herself, and whisper, "No, baby. He left to help someone. He just couldn't find his way back." One of the boys wrote an essay at school titled, "The Day My Uncle Disappeared." His teacher called Gloria, choked up, said she'd never seen a child write with such soul. Gloria folded the essay and slipped it into her Bible. Mateo's belongings became sacred. His watch from Christmas 1992, a worn denim jacket with a stitched 49ers patch, a rusted screwdriver he'd used for years. But the hardest absence of all was the one he never removed. The ring. He wore that graduation ring with pride, never took it off. Not to shower, not to fix engines, not even to sleep. "It's a part of me," he once told her. She'd laughed back then. Now it echoed in her mind like a riddle she couldn't solve. It was the one thing that never came home. On the 10th anniversary of his disappearance, Gloria made dinner for two, set a place for him, lit a candle, played a 49ers game on mute. She smiled, briefly, when the camera showed a fan in the stands wearing the same hat Mateo used to wear. Grief no longer screamed. It sighed, a tired, slow ache, a domesticated sorrow that never truly settled. By 2013, nearly 15 years later, Gloria walked with a cane. Her voice grew quieter. Her eyes stayed closed longer, but every time the phone rang, she straightened, as if it could still be him, as if any ring might bring him back. That year, something strange happened. A group of tourists were birdwatching near the southern edge of Yosemite by the Merced River. One of them, an amateur photographer obsessed with pelicans, captured an unusual image. A bird with something shiny on its leg. They assumed it was trash, a tag, maybe a metal clasp. But when they zoomed in, they saw something that made them pause. It was a ring with a red stone. They didn't know it yet, but that photograph was about to change everything. The photo didn't go viral. It didn't explode across social media or end up on a primetime news slot. It sat quietly in a birdwatching forum, under a thread titled, "Odd Ring on Pelican in Yosemite," posted by a user named Mike H83. The responses were casual. Most assumed it was a metal tag, some kind of wildlife tracker. One person joked that maybe the pelican had been married. But one user, silent for months on the forum, clicked on the image and stopped breathing. Gloria stared at the photo on her old desktop screen in Fresno, the glow of the monitor reflecting in her glasses. Her hand moved slowly toward the mouse, her heart pounding like it hadn't in years. She zoomed in. The image became grainy, but she could still see it. Silver. dull from time and exposure, wrapped around the pelican's leg, and in the center, a deep red stone. She stood, nearly knocking the chair back. Her fingers shook as she printed the image and walked into the kitchen. On the fridge, beneath a yellowing magnet from Mateo's old garage, was a photo of him from 1984, smiling in his cap and gown, hand proudly lifted to show the ring. The same ring. Her knees nearly gave out. The next morning, she drove straight to the Yosemite Ranger Station, picture in hand. She waited nearly an hour to be seen, and when the ranger finally sat with her, she placed the photo on the desk, followed by Mateo's graduation photo, and finally, the yearbook. She said nothing at first, just watched the ranger's face change. "This ring," she finally said, voice hoarse but steady, "belonged to my son. He disappeared here 15 years ago." The ranger nodded slowly, professional and polite but cautious, promised to escalate it, to pass it to the park's biologists. Gloria left without much hope, but with something flickering inside her that hadn't stirred in years. Weeks passed. Then, a call. A pelican, possibly the same one, had been spotted again near Wawana Point. A team of researchers tracking bird migration routes had seen the ring and were attempting a safe capture using a baiting method. Gloria didn't sleep the night before. She sat in Mateo's room, staring at his things as if they might come alive again. When the call came back, it was short and unforgettable. The pelican had been safely caught, the object removed from its leg. It was, without question, a silver-class ring. It was tarnished, worn by time and exposure to sun and water, but inside, engraved in small block letters, were words no one else could deny. Mateo R. Jimenez, class of '84. She didn't cry when they placed it in her hand. She just looked at it as if staring into a window. Her thumb brushed over the scratch on the edge, the tiny dent near the stone. It was exactly as she remembered. For a moment, she pressed it to her lips. The news broke quickly. Local journalists showed up at her door, cameras pointed, microphones extended. They wanted to know everything. How had the ring ended up on a pelican? What did it mean? Was Mateo still alive? Gloria didn't speak. Not to them. She only gave one request to the rangers. "Take me to the exact place where they found the bird." 2 days later, wrapped in Mateo's old denim jacket, she stood beside the Merced River, near a quiet clearing where mist hung over the surface like breath caught in a memory. The sky was pale, and the air smelled of pine and water. She moved slowly, guided by a ranger and her cane, each step deliberate. She stopped at the water's edge and looked around. There were no answers here, no dramatic clues or messages carved in bark. Just trees, rocks, and time. And yet, something waited. Among the stones near the riverbank, something metal caught her eye. She bent down slowly, painfully, and picked it up. A spark plug. Worn, rusted, caked in dirt. The kind of thing a mechanic might carry. The kind of thing Mateo always had in his pocket, or left behind absent-mindedly after a job. She turned it over in her fingers. It might have been nothing, but it didn't feel like nothing. She closed her hand around it and whispered, "You were here." She didn't try to make sense of the pelican, or how the ring traveled from her son's hand to that bird's leg. Maybe he dropped it in the river 15 years ago. Maybe someone found it and attached it to the bird as a joke or a tribute. Maybe it washed downstream and got tangled in reeds. She didn't care about the how, only that it had returned. The ring had found its way back to her. For Gloria, it was more than metal. It was a voice, faint and distant, saying, "I was here. I'm real. You weren't wrong to wait." Hope didn't rush back in with fireworks. It entered quietly, like a familiar scent. It moved through her like warmth returning to frozen limbs. She looked at the trees, the river, the sky. She wasn't expecting a miracle, but she knew something now. He hadn't disappeared completely. The world had remembered him, and in that she found her breath again. Gloria didn't go back to Fresno right away. She stayed in the small rental cabin near the south entrance of Yosemite for 3 more days. Not because she expected to find Mateo in the woods or walking beside the river. Not even because she believed there was more evidence waiting to be uncovered. She stayed because something in her had shifted. Not outward, but inward. The ring had spoken. Not in words. Not in anything that could be recorded or broadcast. But in something deeper. After 15 years, the ache of not knowing had become part of her. But now, the uncertainty was no longer the same. It wasn't just where is he? It became, what do I do with what remains? On the second night in the cabin, she laid the ring on the wooden table under a small lamp. The surface gleamed faintly, the red stone catching the glow like a quiet ember. She placed the spark plug beside it, as if the two belonged together. She remembered his hands, strong, calloused, always in motion. She remembered the smell of engine grease and citrus soap. She remembered the sound of him whistling football tunes, always off-key, especially after a 49ers win. He was everywhere and nowhere, in the jacket on her shoulders, in the empty passenger seat of her car, in the football cap that still hung by her door back home. People asked if she believed he was alive. She always hesitated to answer. I believe he existed, she said, and that he mattered. The world wanted a resolution. TV reporters called again, wanting updates. A documentary producer offered to fly her to Los Angeles for a filmed interview. She refused every offer. They didn't understand. This wasn't entertainment. It wasn't a mystery to be solved in 42 minutes. It was a life. A boy who became a man who went out one morning to help someone and didn't come back. Back in Fresno, her neighbors stopped her on the sidewalk. I saw the story, Gloria. It's unbelievable. But she didn't tell them everything. She didn't mention the rusted spark plug. She didn't show the copy of the photo she kept in her coat pocket. That was hers. Her proof. Her peace. Spring arrived slowly that year, and with it came the anniversary, year 16. Gloria didn't light a candle this time. Instead, she drove out to a hill just outside town, where Mateo used to take his nephews to watch the stars during meteor showers. She brought a folding chair, a thermos of coffee, and the ring around her neck. She sat alone in the wind, eyes closed, face tilted upward. There were no voices, no visions, just the distant sound of wind over dry grass. And somewhere in the far-off distance, a group of boys shouting as they played football on an open field. Someone yelling, "Touchdown," with the same energy Mateo used to have. She smiled. Not everything needed to be explained. Some stories didn't end with revelations. Some ended with acceptance. Not the kind that comes from giving up, the kind that rises from within when you've carried the same weight for too long. And finally, gently, you decide to put it down. The ring went into a small wooden box beside Mateo's other keepsakes. She didn't wear it every day anymore, but she still opened the box sometimes, ran her fingers across the engraving and whispered, "You were always more than just gone." She spoke to him sometimes, aloud in the house, when a 49ers game was on, when something broke and she caught herself reaching for her phone to call him. She would smile, shake her head and say, "You'd have known what to do." She never got closure in the way others wanted. There were no confessions, no neatly wrapped explanation, no miracle. But there was a choice, a personal, quiet choice, to stop chasing ghosts, to start remembering the person, to stop asking, "Why did he disappear?" and to start saying, "He was here, and that's enough." Gloria never expected another letter, but in the fall of 2015, almost a year after the Pelican incident, she received one, official-looking, marked with the logo of the National Park Service. It arrived in a thin, cream-colored envelope, the kind usually reserved for apologies or policy updates. She opened it with no urgency, expecting a survey or brochure. Inside was a single page, typewritten, formal, yet its contents made her pause. An old field report had resurfaced, misfiled, forgotten, now digitized through a new internal audit system. The letter summarized a 1999 ranger log recorded 3 days after Mateo's disappearance. It noted that a camper had reported hearing a man shouting for help across the river near the Merced, at a section known for steep rocks and poor visibility. A ranger had responded but found nothing. No follow-up search was conducted. The ranger who filed the note had since retired. Gloria's hands trembled, not because it changed everything, but because it confirmed what she had always suspected. Something had happened. Someone had heard him. He had been alive, for at least some time after the others had already given up hope. She placed the letter beside the ring box and stared at it for hours. Not in anger, not in grief, but in reflection. She didn't blame the ranger. The river was wild, the woods deep, the systems imperfect, human. Still, the document had weight, not just factual, symbolic. Someone had heard him. the echo of that single lost voice across water. Months passed, and with them came another discovery, this time from the archives of the local fire department. An engineer doing an internal report found a photo in a forgotten album. It was taken during a training drill near Yosemite's western boundary, dated just days after Mateo vanished. The photo was of equipment laid out beside a fire engine, and in the far background, blurred and nearly lost in the grain, was a man walking through the woods. Gloria was called in by the department after the story of the ring resurfaced. They hadn't been sure, but something in the figure's posture, the way he carried himself, the angle of his shoulders, it struck someone. She looked at the image through a magnifying glass. It wasn't clear. It wasn't proof. But she whispered, "That's him." Not because of his face, which was unrecognizable, but because of the way he held his left hand, slightly curled as if he were used to clutching a wrench or holding his ring when thinking, a habit he'd had since high school. Again, no one could say for sure, but to her, it was a fragment of presence, a reminder that Mateo hadn't vanished like smoke. He had passed through this world, and perhaps in ways no one could trace, had tried to find his way back. She began writing him letters. Not long, tear-stained ones, just small notes. "I made your favorite soup today. The 49ers won again, you'd have loved it. Your nephew passed his driving test." She folded each one, placed them in a small tin box, and buried it beneath the maple tree in her backyard. The same tree he'd planted when he was 17. One letter, she burned instead. She stood in the yard, wind cold against her face, and dropped it into a small fire bowl, watched it curl and blacken. "I forgive the silence," she said, watching the ashes rise. Years passed. The documentary offers returned. One was even greenlit for production. She declined, but the filmmakers went ahead without her. She never watched it. Didn't need to. Her truth wasn't for sale. Her home became quieter, her movement slower, but the ring remained, now resting beside a framed photo of Mateo in his graduation gown. Not on display, just present, like he'd always been. On the 20th anniversary of his disappearance, the Park Service invited her to a private event. A new bench installed near Wawona Point, overlooking the place where the Pelican had been found. A plaque read, "In memory of the missing, and those who never stopped searching." She sat on that bench for over an hour, said nothing, just breathed. And in that silence, she realized something. She no longer waited. She remembered. In 2020, an unexpected package arrived. It came from a retired hiker who'd recently cleaned out his old camping gear. Inside a Ziploc bag was a weathered map of Yosemite's west side, folded, marked with pen lines. In the corner, a handwritten note in smudged ink, "Halberd's truck, breakdown, 11/5/99. There was no name on the map, no way to confirm who had written the note, but Gloria recognized the handwriting instantly. She had seen it on birthday cards, grocery lists, scribbled jokes left on her refrigerator. Mateo's. The final trace. Not a trail to follow, not a clue to solve the mystery, but a mark of intention. He had arrived. He had planned his route. He had left something behind, not to be found by strangers, but by time itself. She pressed the note to her chest and closed her eyes. When Gloria passed in the winter of 2022, her funeral was small, intimate. Her nephews read short tributes. Her brother played an old 49ers game recording in the background, and her box of letters was buried with her. She left no instructions for the ceremony, only one request written on a folded piece of paper inside her Bible. "Say that I waited, and that I found peace." No one spoke of tragedy that day, only of persistence, of memory, of a woman who never gave up, not because she needed answers, but because she loved without expiration. Mateo Jr. was never declared dead. His case remains listed as unsolved, a phrase that speaks of failure, but often hides something deeper. It was never about paperwork. It was about a mechanic who stopped on the road to help someone, a man who disappeared not from life but into the cracks between noise and silence, into the wildness of the world, and a mother who found him again, not in a body, not in a goodbye, but in a ring carried by a pelican through 15 years of air and storm. Sometimes closure doesn't come like thunder. Sometimes it lands softly, on wings,